Why did no one notice her standing near the exit, the only place where the shadows were deepest? She moved through the medical tent like a ghost, not rushed, not slow, just precise. Bandages replaced with steady hands, IV lines checked twice, pain levels noted without commentary. Lieutenant Arya Hale did not waste words. She did not offer comfort she couldn't guarantee. The desert heat pressed against the canvas walls, turning the air thick and heavy, but she never wiped sweat from her brow. She worked as if heat was just another variable to manage. Around her, wounded men breathed, groaned, waited. Some stared at her, curious. Others barely noticed her at all. That was fine. Invisible meant uninterrupted. Invisible meant safe. At the edge of the tent, Sergeant Marcus Chen leaned against a supply cabinet, watching her with narrowed eyes. He didn't like quiet people. Quiet meant secrets, and secrets didn't belong in a place like this. "That's the new medic," he muttered to another corpsman. 2 weeks here, never joins briefings, barely talks, flinched when mortars hit last week. "She does her job," someone replied. Chen scoffed. "A medic scared of gunfire shouldn't be here." Arya heard every word. She always did, but her hands never shook. Her eyes never stopped tracking entrances. She stood where she could reach cover in 2 steps. She angled her body so she could see reflections in metal surfaces. No one taught medics to do that. In the corner office, Captain Douglas Hammond paused over paperwork, watching her through the plastic window. Something about her didn't align. Her file was sealed. Requests denied. "Need to know," they kept telling him. But Hammond had been in uniform long enough to recognize when someone was carrying a past heavier than their rank. That night, as generators hummed and helicopters thudded in the distance, Arya sat alone outside the tent, cleaning her hands. Private Torres approached, young and nervous, arm in a sling. "Ma'am, thanks. Yesterday you were calm, made me feel like I wasn't going to die." For a moment something in her softened, just a crack. "You'll be fine," she said. "Clean wound, you'll heal." He hesitated. "Have you ever been in real combat?" The question landed like a stone, dropped into still water. She didn't look at him. Focus on getting better. That night, sleep came in fragments. Sounds pulled her back again and again. The war had a way of whispering when you tried to forget it. Beneath her bunk, inside a locked footlocker, rested a black case she hadn't opened in 18 months. Inside it, a rifle waited. She told herself she was done with that life, that this tent, this penance was enough. But somewhere deep inside, a familiar certainty stirred. The war wasn't finished with her. 18 months earlier, she hadn't been a medic. She'd been a name that never appeared on rosters, a call sign spoken quietly, Night Phantom. She had learned to slow her breathing until the world narrowed to a single point. She had learned how wind lied, how distance deceived, how one decision could save lives or shatter them. Her team had been small, precise, family. And then came the mission that never should have existed. Bad intelligence, a kill zone disguised as routine. The moment her first round broke the silence, the mountains answered with fire. She remembered crawling, bleeding, dragging a body that no longer needed saving. 17 casualties, 3 dead, her team gone. Command called it an intelligence failure. Arya called it her fault. They offered her a medal. She asked for a transfer. "Let me save lives," she'd said. "Let me balance the scales." So Night Phantom disappeared. And Lieutenant Hale was born. But training that deep doesn't fade, it sleeps. 3 days before the attack, a young private told her something felt wrong. Observation points, military spacing, patterns. Another soldier saw movement, 40 fighters, heavy weapons. Command hesitated. They always did. That night, unable to rest, Arya walked the tent, counted patients, marked exits, noted weak points. The medical tent was not built to withstand intent. Her hand rested on the footlocker longer than she wanted to admit. She opened it, assembled the rifle, then disassembled it again, just in case. The next day the signs multiplied: delayed convoys, lost contact, shadows that didn't linger long enough to confirm. She rearranged supplies, moved patients farther from entrances. Sergeant Chen noticed, said nothing. At 3:47, the first mortar hit. Arya was already moving before the explosion finished echoing. Down away from the walls. Canvas rippled, lights flickered, screams cut through the dark. This wasn't random fire. This was a breach. Gunfire followed, close, organized. Hammond burst into the tent. North gates down, hostiles inside the wire. Then the wall tore open. Figures moved through fire and smoke. The medical tent was no longer neutral. Hammond asked how many patients could move. Arya already knew the number. Not enough. Get who you can to the rear, she said. Lock it down. What about you? I'll stay. Chen handed her his pistol with shaking hands. In 4 seconds, she checked it like a professional. He understood then. The first enemy stepped inside. He never stepped out. Arya moved through shadow and cover, firing only when necessary. 2, 3, 5. But a pistol wasn't enough. She ran for the rifle. When the Mk-11 came together in her hands, the past surged forward. Not glory, not pride, just clarity. She controlled angles, managed breath, chose targets that mattered. They recognized her. Someone whispered her call sign in fear. They hadn't come for the base. They'd come for her. And still she stayed. Grenades, machine gun fire, smoke and flame. She threw one grenade back. She moved patients under fire. She barricaded doors with hospital beds. She fought with scalpel and bone when bullets ran low. By the time the last enemy fell, 45 fighters lay dead or incapacitated. And Arya stood shaking, not from fear but from memory. Helicopters arrived too late to help. Early enough to witness. Captain Hammond saw the ruined tent, the bodies, the medic holding the line alone. He didn't ask how. He already knew. As dawn broke, she handed over the rifle. Let go. She didn't feel victorious. She felt intact. Later, when silence returned and the wounded slept safely, Arya sat outside the ruined tent, watching the sun rise. She had taken lives again. But she had saved more. And somewhere between the two, she understood something she hadn't before. Redemption isn't about erasing who you were. It's about choosing who you protect now. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence feel louder than the explosion she remembered? Arya lay awake long before dawn, staring at the faint outline of the tent ceiling, listening to the base breathe. Generators hummed like distant insects. Boots crunched on gravel. Somewhere a radio crackled and died. Sleep refused to come, not because of noise, but because her mind would not stop measuring distance, time, probability. The war had taught her that quiet was rarely empty. Quiet was a warning. She rose before anyone else, careful not to wake the other medics. Her movements were slow, deliberate, not cautious, controlled. Outside, the desert air was cold enough to sting, a reminder that this place did not belong to anyone. She stood near the perimeter fence, hands tucked into her sleeves, watching guard rotations. She counted steps, not because she needed to, but because she always had. She told herself it was habit. In the medical tent later that morning, the routine resumed. Wounds cleaned, fluids replaced, pain managed. Arya worked without comment, without complaint. To the others, she was efficient but distant. To the wounded, she was steady. That mattered more. Private Torres watched her closely now, not with suspicion, with something closer to curiosity. He noticed how she never turned her back to an entrance, how she adjusted lighting so shadows fell behind her instead of in front, how she spoke softly but with absolute certainty. "Doc," he said quietly while she checked his vitals, "you ever think about leaving this place?" She paused just long enough to register the question. "Everyone thinks about leaving," she replied. "Not everyone gets to." He nodded, unsure why that answer unsettled him. At the far end of the tent, Sergeant Chen pretended not to watch her. He didn't trust her calm. He didn't trust the way she listened more than she spoke. He'd seen too many soldiers break out here to mistake silence for strength. "Briefing in 10, he said flatly as he passed her. She didn't respond, she never did. Captain Hammond noticed that too. In the command tent, voices overlapped. Satellite images, patrol reports, speculation. No one mentioned the medical tent. They never did. Medical was something you noticed only when it failed. Hammond's eyes drifted toward the flap, toward where he knew Arya would be standing if she were there, close enough to hear, far enough to be ignored. He wondered how many people like her he'd met over the years and dismissed too quickly. After the briefing, he called her in. "Lieutenant Hale," he said, studying her face, "how long have you been a medic?" "Long enough," she answered. He leaned back slightly. "Your evaluations say you're new to this field." She didn't flinch. "I learned quickly." "That's not what concerns me," Hammond said. "You don't move like someone who's new." There it was. Arya met his gaze without defiance, without apology. "Is there an issue with my performance, sir?" "No," he admitted, "quite the opposite." "Then my movement shouldn't matter." Hammond watched her for a long moment. He could press, demand answers, but instinct, something honed by his own years, told him not to. "Dismissed," he said quietly. As she turned to leave, he added, "If things change, I need to know who I'm standing next to." She nodded once. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning chill. The desert shimmered, too quiet, too still. That afternoon, a patrol came in early, dust-covered, tight-faced. One of them, a woman with sunburned cheeks and eyes that had seen too much, collapsed onto a cot the moment she reached the tent. "Corporal Mackenzie." Arya moved to her immediately. "Dehydration," Mackenzie muttered, "but that's not why I'm here." Arya hung the IV without asking questions. She waited. Mackenzie gripped her wrist. "We saw them." Arya's pulse ticked faster, but her face didn't change. "How many?" she asked. "Enough," Mackenzie whispered. "They weren't hiding from us. They were hiding from drones." That was worse. "They're trained," Mackenzie continued. "Not locals, not desperate, disciplined." Arya nodded slowly. "Did command listen?" Mackenzie laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "They never do until it's too late." That night, Arya reorganized the tent again. She told herself it was about efficiency. But really, she was shaping space, creating flow, removing blind corners. She shifted oxygen tanks closer to structural supports. She stacked supply crates in ways that made sense only if you'd ever needed cover in a place that wasn't built for it. Sergeant Chen watched her in silence this time. "You expecting something?" he finally asked. Arya didn't stop working. "I'm expecting the unexpected." He snorted. "That's not an answer. It's the only honest one." He shook his head and walked away, but slower than before. Long after lights out, Arya returned to her bunk. The base slept uneasily. She could feel it, like a held breath. She opened her footlocker. The rifle case waited. Her hands hovered above it. She closed the locker again. Not yet. She lay back, eyes open, letting memories surface despite her resistance. Snow instead of sand, mountains instead of wire, a voice in her ear counting wind she could never see, a decision that couldn't be undone. She had promised herself she wouldn't pick up that weapon again, that saving lives would be enough. But promises made in peace don't always survive war. The first anomaly came just after midnight, a blip on radar that vanished before confirmation, then another, then silence. At 200, communications with a nearby outpost went dark. At 300, the wind shifted. Arya sat up in her bunk, heart steady, mind racing. She didn't need alarms, her body knew. She stood, dressed, and walked the tent one final time, patients sleeping, some murmuring, some restless. She stopped beside Tors. "You stay flat no matter what," she whispered. His eyes opened. "What's happening?" "Nothing yet." That was the truth. She went to the rear storage area and knelt, pulling the tarp aside just enough to confirm the rifle case was still there. Still waiting. At 3:47, the ground shook. The first explosion knocked dust from the ceiling. The second shattered glass. Arya was on her feet before anyone screamed. "Down," she shouted, "away from the walls." Chaos followed, pain, fear, sound without direction. And through it all, Arya moved. Not as a medic. Not yet. But as someone who had always known this moment was coming. As gunfire erupted outside and the perimeter failed, she felt something inside her settle. Not excitement, not relief, but acceptance. This was the price of being capable. You don't always get to choose when you are needed. And when the shadows finally crossed the threshold of the medical tent, Arya Hale stepped forward, not because she wanted to fight again, but because walking away was no longer an option. Why did the moment stretch when the first shadow crossed the torn canvas, like the world itself was holding its breath? Arya felt it before she saw it, that subtle shift in air pressure, the way sound narrowed, the instinctive tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. This wasn't chaos. Chaos was loud, sloppy. This was intent. Gunfire snapped outside the tent, sharp and disciplined. Not the wild spray of panicked fighters, but controlled bursts. Someone was directing this. Someone who understood angles. Someone who knew where to hit first. The medical tent. Arya moved low, pulling a wounded soldier back from the wall as rounds punched through canvas. Fabric tore like skin. Dust and debris rained down. A man screamed as a gurney flipped. She pushed him flat, pressed a hand to his shoulder. "Stay with me," she said, not gently but firmly, commanding his focus, commanding his will. Another explosion rocked the base, closer this time. The emergency lights flickered, casting everything in red and shadow. For a brief moment the tent felt unreal, like a stage between worlds. Life and death separated by canvas and choice. Captain Hammond burst in, his uniform smeared with dirt and blood. His eyes swept the room, already counting losses. "They're inside the wire," he shouted. "North gate's gone, west perimeter collapsing." Arya didn't look at him. She was already doing the math. "How many patients can move?" he demanded. 18, she answered immediately. 14 can't without killing them. Hammond swore under his breath. Another detonation closer still. The western wall of the tent tore open as if ripped by an invisible hand. Firelight flooded in, smoke, screaming. And then silhouettes. Men moving with rifles up, spacing tight, no hesitation. They weren't here to loot. They were here to erase. Sergeant Chen skidded into view, weapon raised, eyes wide. "They're pushing straight for medical." Arya's heart didn't race, it slowed. "Hammond," she said, grabbing his arm, "get everyone who can move into the rear supply room. Lock it. Radio for QRF now." "What about you?" he asked. She finally met his eyes. There was no bravado there, no promise, just truth. "Someone has to protect the ones who can't run." For half a second he hesitated, then he nodded. "God help you." He turned and ran. Chen stared at her. "You serious?" "Give me your sidearm." "What? Now?" He fumbled, unholstering his pistol and handing it over. Arya checked it in 4 seconds, chamber magazine count, her movements smooth, automatic. Chen's breath caught. "You're not just a medic," he whispered. "Right now," she said, chambering around, "I'm whatever keeps them alive." The first hostile stepped through the torn wall. Arya waited. She let him take 3 steps inside, just long enough for his eyes to adjust to the darkness. Then she fired twice. Center mass. He fell without a sound. The second man shouted. A third raised his rifle. Arya shifted position, using a support pole as cover, and fired again. Another body dropped. She moved immediately, never staying where a muzzle flash would betray her. This wasn't rage. It was work. Suppressive fire ripped through the tent, shredding equipment. Patients screamed. Arya crawled low, sliding between bunks, checking faces as she passed. "Stay down," she told Tors. "Don't move." "What's happening?" he gasped. "I'm saving your life," she replied. "Help me by staying still." The pistol barked again. A man fell near the entrance, but she knew this wouldn't last. A sidearm was a bandage on a wound that needed surgery. She needed the rifle. Bullets snapped overhead as she sprinted toward the rear storage area, breath steady despite the chaos. She dove under a spare bunk, yanked the black case free, and dragged it into cover. Her hands didn't hesitate. Receiver, barrel, stock, scope. Click, snap, lock. The MK-11 came together in her hands like it had never been apart, like it had been waiting. Memory flooded back, not images, not guilt, but sensation, the familiar weight, the balance, the way the world narrowed when she shouldered it. She took position behind an overturned cabinet, sighting through the scope. 8 hostiles outside the breach, 1 coordinating, 2 setting up a firing position. She exhaled. Pressed. The first man collapsed mid-command. Worked the bolt, pressed again. Another fell. Again. Again. 5 rounds, 5 bodies. The remaining fighters scattered, shouting. One voice cut through the noise, sharp, afraid. A word she hadn't heard spoken aloud in 18 months. Night Phantom. Arya's jaw tightened. They knew. This wasn't just an attack on the base. This was a hunt. Gunfire intensified. They adapted, changing angles, probing for her position. She shifted constantly, never firing from the same place twice. She wasn't trying to win, she was buying time. A grenade arced through the breach. Arya moved without thinking. She lunged, grabbed it mid-bounce, and hurled it back outside. The explosion shook the ground. Screams followed. She rolled, came up firing, dropping another attacker who tried to rush through the smoke. Time fractured, seconds stretched, minutes vanished. Her barrel grew hot, brass littered the floor. She checked her count. Too low. She keyed the radio she'd pulled from a fallen fighter. "This is Night Phantom," she said, the call sign tasting strange in her mouth. "Medical tent compromised. Non-ambulatory wounded inside. I need support now." Static, then Hammond's voice, strained and disbelieving. "Night Phantom, who the hell is this?" "It's Lieutenant Hale," she said, "and I can't hold much longer." A pause, then QRF is 10 minutes out. 10 minutes? In combat, that might as well have been an hour. "I'll hold," she said quietly, "or I won't." She moved again, this time not backward but forward. She changed the geometry, forced them to react, shot an oxygen tank near the entrance. The explosion tore through the doorway, blocking one route entirely. Fire spread, smoke thickened. Through it all, Arya never raised her voice. Never panicked. She was calm because she had already accepted the cost. And as the enemy regrouped for their final push, she knew, with a clarity that surprised even her, that survival was no longer the goal. Meaning was. If this was where she stood, then this was where she would stand completely. Not as Night Phantom. not as a medic, but as someone who refused to let the helpless be erased quietly in the dark. And when the doors burst open again, Arya Hale met them head-on, steady, resolute, and unbroken. What does it feel like when you realize you may not walk away and still choose to stand? The doors didn't burst all at once. That would have been reckless. Instead, they tested her, probing fire, a silhouette, a pause, professionals learning the shape of their resistance. Arya used the moment to move. She dragged a gurney sideways, flipped it, and slid behind it. Not for cover, it wouldn't stop rifle rounds, but to break sightlines, to force hesitation. Hesitation saved lives. "Anyone who can hear me," she called softly, not shouting, "crawl, stay low, follow the wall when I say go." Fear had turned the tent into something fragile. Men lay still not because they were wounded, but because terror had frozen them. Arya understood that fear. She had lived inside it once. You didn't fight it by yelling. You fought it by giving it a shape, a task. She fired once, not to kill, but to remind them she was still there. The response came instantly. Suppressive fire tore through the gurney, shredded medical charts, punched holes through IV bags that sprayed saline like rain. Someone cried out as shrapnel sliced his arm. Arya was already moving. She slid to the next position, checked angles, exhaled, fired. A body dropped at the threshold. Another stumbled back, wounded but alive. She let him go, not out of mercy, but because wounded men pulled resources. They slowed advances. Death was final. Injury was disruptive. Her magazine ran dry. She didn't rush the reload. Hand steady, breathe, insert, tap, rack. That calm, that refusal to hurry, wasn't bravery. It was discipline. From the rear, Tor's voice cracked. "Ma'am." "Stay down," she said without looking. "Count my shots if you can." He swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." She changed position again, always changing, never predictable. They pushed harder now, two at once. She dropped one, wounded another. He screamed and crawled back. His scream carried something else with it, uncertainty, doubt. "Good." Her radio crackled, fragmented voices, chaos outside, Hammond shouting orders, a call for air support denied due to proximity. Arya didn't need updates. She could feel the fight tightening, compressing. This was the phase where numbers tried to overwhelm skill. She glanced at the wounded behind her, men she'd treated, names she knew, futures she had no right to gamble with. She moved forward again, aggressive now, controlled risk. She needed them reacting, not advancing. A flash of movement, a figure heavier than the others, armor, leadership. She clocked him instantly. He wasn't rushing, he was waiting. He was waiting for her to make a mistake. So she didn't. She lobbed a fire extinguisher through the smoke and shot it mid-air. White powder exploded into the breach, blinding, choking. She surged through the confusion, firing 3 precise rounds that dropped 2 men before they could see. She slid behind an overturned table, heart finally hammering now, not with fear but exertion. Her lungs burned. Her arms trembled faintly. This was the part they never talked about. Not the fear of dying, but the exhaustion of surviving. She checked ammo. Not enough. She switched to the pistol, keeping the rifle close. Short range now, brutal. A hostile appeared through the smoke, too close. She fired instinctively. He went down at her feet. She stepped over him without looking. Her foot caught on debris. She stumbled. A shot cracked past her ear. She rolled, fired blind, felt the impact travel up her arm as the round connected. She didn't wait to confirm. She never did. "Tors," she called, "now." He crawled forward, dragging another wounded man with him. Sweat streamed down his face. Terror and determination mixed in equal measure. "You're doing good," she said. "Keep moving." He nodded, eyes wide, and did exactly what she said. The enemy regrouped again. She could hear them shouting, frustrated now, angry, losing men in a place that should have been easy. That anger made them sloppy. She exploited it. Shot an oxygen tank near the north entrance. The blast blocked it completely, flames licking up the canvas. Smoke poured in. Heat surged. The tent was dying. She knew it. And so did they. This was the final push. She braced behind her last piece of cover, rifle steady despite the tremor creeping into her hands. She had learned long ago that shaking didn't mean weakness. It meant you were alive and pushing past limits. The first man through the smoke dropped instantly. The second made it 2 steps farther. The third almost reached her. Almost. Her pistol clicked empty. She let it fall. Rifle up, 1 shot, 2. Then silence. Not victory silence. The kind that waits. A heavy shape emerged from the smoke, larger than the rest, armored, confident, a machine gun cradled like it was nothing. The leader. He opened fire. The roar was deafening. Cover splintered. Shards of metal tore past her face. She felt heat on her cheek, blood or fire, she couldn't tell. She held her aim anyway. She waited. The gun ran dry. Everyone had to reload. She fired her last round. The impact staggered him but didn't drop him. Armor held. He roared in fury, reaching for a sidearm. Arya moved. She dropped the rifle and drew a scalpel from her aid bag. Steel was steel. She closed the distance before he understood what was happening. Inside the reach of his weapon. Inside his expectation. They collided hard. He outweighed her, he was stronger. But strength without control was useless. She drove the blade into the gap at his neck, not deep enough to kill, but enough to disrupt. Pain made him hesitate. Hesitation was fatal. They went down together. He tried to crush her. She twisted, struck nerve clusters she'd learned years ago, slammed his head against the floor. His mask came loose. His eyes were wide, not with hatred but disbelief. "Night Phantom," he gasped. "They said you were dead." "Not yet," she answered and struck him again. He went limp. Arya staggered to her feet. The tent was silent except for fire and distant gunfire fading away. Smoke curled upward, carrying the smell of cordite and scorched canvas. She counted bodies. Too many. But not the ones that mattered. Her hands finally began to shake. Not from fear. From release. She leaned against a support beam that no longer supported anything and closed her eyes for half a second. Just long enough to feel the weight of everything she had been trying to bury. She had broken her promise. She had taken lives again. But behind her, men still breathed. And sometimes, that was the only balance the world allowed. As helicopters thundered overhead and footsteps rushed toward the ruined tent, Arya Hale straightened, not because she felt strong, but because she refused to let this moment own her. Not after everything it had cost. What happens after the last shot, when the noise fades, and you're left alone with what you've done? Arya didn't lower her hands right away. The rifle was gone, the pistol empty, the scalpel slick with blood, but her body still held the shape of the fight, muscles locked, breath shallow, every sense straining for the next threat that never came. Silence settled in layers. Not peace, never peace. This was the silence that followed violence, heavy and fragile, like the air before something shattered again. Smoke drifted through the torn remains of the tent. Canvas sagged. Fire crackled in small, stubborn pockets. Somewhere nearby, a man sobbed, not loud enough to draw attention, just enough to be heard if you were listening for it. Arya was. She turned slowly, forcing herself to catalog the living before counting the dead. A habit learned the hard way. The wounded who had survived would need her now. Not Night Phantom, not the soldier, the medic. She knelt beside a man bleeding from a shoulder wound, tore open a bandage pack with shaking fingers and pressed it down. Her hands trembled harder with each heartbeat. Adrenaline was leaving. It always left like a betrayal. "You're okay," she said, though she wasn't sure if she meant him or herself. "Stay with me." Tors crouched nearby, pale, eyes wide, his rifle clutched like an anchor. He looked at her like he was seeing something sacred and something terrifying at the same time. "Ma'am," he whispered, "they're all." She nodded once. He swallowed hard. "You saved us." The word saved hit her harder than any round. She turned away, focusing on tying off the bandage. "Help me check the others," she said. "We're not done." Footsteps approached, careful, weapons raised. Friendly voices followed. "Clear." Medical tent secured. Captain Hammond appeared through the smoke, stopping short at the sight before him. Bodies scattered, equipment destroyed, and at the center of it all, one medic kneeling among the wounded, hands red, shoulders bowed under something heavier than exhaustion. "Hale," his voice faltered, "how did you?" She stood slowly, forcing her back straight, training again, control again. 14 non-ambulatory patients secured, she reported. 0 fatalities inside the tent. Hammond stared at her, not as a commanding officer, but as a man confronted with something he hadn't wanted to understand. He bent and picked up the rifle someone had leaned against a crate, turned it in his hands, noted the modifications. "This isn't standard issue," he said quietly. "No, sir." His eyes lifted to hers, Night Phantom. She didn't deny it. "They said you retired." "I tried." He exhaled slowly, like someone letting go of a long-held question. "You saved this base." Arya shook her head. "I saved a room full of men who couldn't save themselves." That answer mattered. As medics poured in and the QRF secured the perimeter, someone draped a blanket over her shoulders. Another tried to take the scalpel from her hand. She let it go without resistance. When the chaos finally softened into order, Arya stepped outside. The desert was changing color, night pulling back, dawn bleeding in. She stood there alone, watching smoke rise into a sky that didn't care what had happened below it. Her hands were still shaking. She clenched them, then forced them open. This was the part no one prepared you for. The part where survival felt heavier than loss. She saw faces in the smoke. Jackson, Martinez, Reed, people she had failed once, people she carried with her everywhere. "I broke my promise," she whispered. The desert offered no answer. Tors approached cautiously, as if she might disappear if he came too close. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She considered the question carefully. "I will be," she said, "eventually." He nodded, not fully understanding, but accepting it. Behind them, soldiers moved differently now, quieter, with space around her, respect maybe, or fear, or both. Arya didn't want either. She wanted the silence to mean something. Hammond joined her, hands clasped behind his back. "Command's going to want answers." "I know. They'll offer medals. I won't take them." He glanced at her. "Why not?" She looked back at the ruined tent. "Because this wasn't bravery, it was necessity." He nodded slowly. "You going to stay?" That question lingered. Arya watched the sun crest the horizon, painting the wreckage gold. Beauty layered over devastation. "Yes," she said finally, "if they'll let me." Hammond studied her, then extended his hand, not as a superior but as a witness. "I'd be honored," he said. She shook it, firm and brief. As the morning fully arrived, the base began to breathe again. Repairs started, reports filed, lives continued. And Arya Hale, medic, soldier, something in between, walked back toward the wounded. She had taken lives to protect life. That contradiction would never leave her. But neither would the knowledge that, when the moment came, she did not turn away. And sometimes, redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about standing still long enough to carry it forward, without letting it destroy what comes next. Why does survival feel heavier than the moment you almost did? The base didn't celebrate, not really. There were no cheers when the sun fully rose, no triumphant music swelling in the background, just movement, repairs, quiet voices, the slow, deliberate work of people who understood how close everything had come to ending. Arya preferred it that way. She spent the morning back inside what remained of the medical tent, now little more than a skeleton of scorched poles and hanging canvas. A temporary shelter had been erected beside it, but she kept returning to the ruins, as if her body needed proof that it was over, that the night hadn't been a dream stitched together by adrenaline and memory. She cleaned wounds, replaced fluids, checked pupils, spoke softly. No one questioned her authority now. Not Sergeant Chen, who stood guard at the entrance, posture straighter than she'd ever seen it. Not the other medics, who followed her instructions without hesitation. Not the wounded soldiers, who watched her with something deeper than gratitude. Understanding. Still, Arya avoided their eyes. Because when she met them, she saw reflections of a version of herself she didn't know how to live with yet. Between patients, she stepped outside. The desert stretched endlessly, indifferent and unchanged. War always felt personal when you were inside it, but the world beyond never noticed. She breathed in dust and smoke and tried to slow her thoughts. This was supposed to be the quiet part, the aftermath, the place where meaning settled. Instead, her mind replayed details she hadn't consciously registered during the fight. The moment she chose to move forward instead of retreat, the weight of the scalpel in her hand, the look in the enemy leader's eyes when he recognized her. They said you were dead. Part of her wished that were true. Captain Hammond found her there, staring into the distance. He didn't speak at first. He had learned that silence mattered around her. Command's response team will arrive tomorrow, he said eventually. Investigations, debriefs, psych evals. She nodded. I know the process. They'll ask why you were armed. They already know. He studied her profile, the calm exterior stretched thin over something raw. They won't like that you made the call alone. She finally looked at him. Would you have preferred I waited for permission? He didn't answer. That's what I thought. Hammond sighed. They'll want to pull you out. High visibility now, too many questions. Arya felt something tighten in her chest, not fear, loss. I don't want to leave, she said quietly. Not yet. I'll fight for you to stay, he replied. But you should know this won't be the same. People will look at you differently. She gave a faint, humorless smile. They already do. Later, Torres approached her with a folded piece of paper. His hands shook as he held it out. What's this? She asked. A letter, he said, for my mom. I thought I was going to die. I didn't want my last words to be nothing. Arya took it gently. You'll give it to her yourself. Still, he insisted, you were there. If something happens later, I want someone to know who saved me. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. I didn't save you alone, she said. But you stood when no one else could, he replied. She didn't argue. That night Arya finally slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but longer than she had in months. Dreams came and went, faces without voices, gunfire without sound. When she woke, she felt wrung out and strangely lighter. As if something had shifted. In the days that followed, reports circulated. 45 enemy fighters neutralized or incapacitated. 0 fatalities among the non-ambulatory wounded. Analysts used words like statistical anomaly and unprecedented defensive outcome. Arya didn't read them. She focused on hands, breath, pulse. The investigation team arrived. Questions followed, some respectful, some thinly veiled accusations. Why did she conceal her background? Why did she rearm? Why didn't she wait? Her answers were simple. Because there was no time. Because people were bleeding. Because someone had to decide. They couldn't argue with results, but they didn't like the implications. On the fourth day, a general visited the base. He shook hands, offered commendations, spoke of valor. Arya stood at attention and declined the medal. "I didn't act for recognition," she said evenly. "I acted because the alternative was unacceptable." The general frowned, but didn't push. That night, alone again, Arya opened her footlocker for the last time. The rifle lay inside the case, cleaned and reassembled by someone else. She stared at it for a long moment. It had saved lives. It had also reopened wounds she'd worked hard to close. She lifted it out, not with reverence, not with regret, and carried it to the armory. When she handed it over, the officer hesitated. "You sure?" "Yes." She signed the release form and walked away without looking back. In the weeks that followed, life at Fob Sentinel resumed its uneven rhythm. Patrols rotated, convoys arrived, wounds healed, others didn't. Arya stayed. She trained medics differently now, taught them to think beyond textbooks, to read space, to listen for what wasn't being said. Sergeant Chin became her quiet shadow, not out of obligation but trust. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he spoke what everyone else avoided. "Do you miss who you were?" Arya considered the question carefully. "I miss who I was before I thought my only value was taking life," she said. "I don't miss the rest." He nodded. "You ever worry it'll happen again?" She watched the horizon where sky met sand in an endless line. "I worry it might not. That scares me more." Because she understood now, capacity wasn't a curse or a gift. It was a responsibility. Months later, Tors left the base, healed and smiling, letter still folded in his pocket. Mackenzie returned to patrol. The tent was rebuilt, stronger this time. And Arya Hale remained exactly where she was needed. Not hidden, not glorified, just present. She never used the call sign again, never corrected those who called her Doc, never explained the scars on her hands or the weight behind her eyes. She didn't need to, because strength didn't announce itself. It showed up quietly, stood between danger and the defenseless, paid the cost without demanding applause. And when the desert winds carried whispers of violence once more, Arya didn't flinch. She checked her supplies, adjusted her stance, and waited. Not for redemption, but for the next moment that would ask who she truly was. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.